Hello everyone, my name is Zahra Hosaneea, and it is with an immense pleasure that I will be doing this short presentation today, which deals with my country, Mauritius, and the reservation that it has placed on Article 24.2b of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and why, in my opinion, I believe that this constitutes major discrimination with regards to learners with Down syndrome in Mauritius. So, briefly about me then. I was called to the bar of England and Wales this year. I am currently undertaking my pupillage in the view of becoming a barrister, full-fledged barrister by next year. And I have been advocating for the rights of persons with disabilities from a young age, which prompted me to co-found Disabilities Empowerment Platform a few years ago. So, jumping straight into the subject, just a few statistics with regards to my country, Mauritius. It is estimated that about 1 in 20 persons who are currently living in Mauritius have a disability, which is about 4.8% of the total population. And it is also estimated that about 1.5% of the total population consists of children with disabilities. And there are 3 predominant types of disabilities in Mauritius. So physical disabilities, making up for 42% of the disability community, visual impairments, 24%, and thirdly, persons with intellectual disabilities, which are deemed to include persons with Down syndrome, and which total up to approximately 20% of the disability community. So, just a few pointers before I get to the crux of the issue. 2 things. Firstly, the Constitution of Mauritius is the supreme law of the country, and it fails, in my opinion, to address disability rights because there are no provisions in the Constitution which specifically address the issue of promotion and protection of the rights of persons with disabilities, save and except for the part where it says that one cannot be discriminated against on the basis of his or her disabilities. But secondly, there is no specific piece of legislation which currently addresses the issue of promotion and protection of persons with disabilities as well. There are a couple of domestic laws which I have listed on the slides below, which cater for some aspects of the lives of persons with disabilities, but as of these days, there is currently no Disability Act. And in my opinion, domestic laws are insufficient in themselves to promote and protect the rights of persons with disabilities. So, jumping straight into the CRPD, it was signed and ratified in 2010 by Mauritius, and obviously its purpose is to protect and promote the human rights of persons with disabilities. We all know that it is based on 8 guiding principles. So inherent dignity, non-discrimination, participation, inclusion, acceptance, equal opportunities, accessibility, equality, and respect for the evolving capacities of children with disabilities. But there are a full list of obligations that a state must be able to fulfill. And I do not propose to go into depth about the obligation of a state, but for purposes of this presentation, I believe that it is appropriate to mention the fact that it is the duty of a state to adopt appropriate legislative measures and to modify or abolish existing laws which might constitute a discrimination against persons with disabilities. So most of these obligations relate to the fact that measures needs to be taken to eliminate any form of discrimination against persons with disabilities. So moving on to the fact, and I cannot stress this enough, that non-discrimination is both a guiding principle under the CRPD, but it is also a standalone right, which demonstrates the impact that the CRPD wanted it to have in the lives of persons with disabilities. So the CRPD is has for intention the need to eliminate all forms of discrimination against persons with disabilities. And a quick note of Article 7 as well, which provides that in all actions concerning children with disabilities, their best interest shall be the primary consideration. So, dealing with the fact that Mauritius has placed a reservation on some of its provisions under the CRPD. Basically, it is a way, a reservation is a way for a state to not bind itself to any provision it does not want to. So it aims at excluding the legal effect of that particular provision in its application in the states. And under Article 46 of the CRPD, it is not precluded, so far as it is compatible with the object and purpose of the CRPD. And it will be my submission under this presentation that placing a reservation under Article 24.2b is directly incompatible with the object and purpose of the CRPD. And for that reason, it is deemed to be a discrimination on the rights of learners with Down syndrome, particularly for purposes of this presentation. So, just a couple of things. In 2015, the CRPD committee issued its list of recommendations under the concluding observation in respect of our initial report of Mauritius. And it is quite lengthy, and I do not intend to go into full details about it, but as far as education is concerned, then it was quite concerned about the fact that Mauritius was found to be very slow in implementing its policy on inclusive education. And also, it was very concerned about the fact that there were 14 integrated units which were being implemented, which in their opinion would only prolong segregation. It's one of its major concerns as well was that children with disabilities who were aged between 2 and 3 were already being enrolled in special schools, which prevented them from the very beginning from being included in the mainstream schools. So amongst the various recommendations that the committee made, it recommended to abolish segregation, to take steps to implement inclusive education, and to take all appropriate measures in regards to promoting for enrollment of children with disabilities, quality and inclusive education. And in 2017, it reiterated the need for this country to remove the reservation which has been placed on Article 24.2b. Briefly about the rights of education before I jump into 24.2b. It is one of the most important rights under international law. It is considered as a prerequisite for the enjoyment of several of the rights. And the CRPD committee has on various occasions reiterated the fact that an inclusive education system was one which was recommended for persons with disabilities. So there are 3 types of regimes that are currently running under Mauritian laws. So firstly, special education needs schools, SEND schools, secondly, integrated units, and finally, mainstreaming. But as of today, there are 53 special education needs institutions which are run by NGOs. There are 6 special education needs units which are run by the ministry. There are 13 integrated units. And as far as the law itself is concerned, the Special Education Needs Authority Act is currently in place, which aims at monitoring and facilitating for implementation of special education needs policies in Mauritius. And I believe that this is a failure of this state party to move away from inclusive education, and it is rather prolonging segregation. So as far as Mauritius is concerned, and I have numbers which I will be discussing later, there is mostly a segregated system that prevails. Jumping straight into Article 24.2b, then, it is the right that persons with disabilities have to access an inclusive, quality, and free education on an equal basis with others. And there is something called the 4A's framework, which has not been formally adopted by the CRPD committee or the CRPD, but it provides some guidance as to what steps needs to be met, what requirements need to be met for Article 24.2b to be properly implemented. And this includes, firstly, the fact that schools and programs must be available in sufficient quantity. Secondly, that schools needs to be accessible. Thirdly, that the education system needs to be acceptable to the language and cultural requirements of all children with disabilities. And finally, that schools must be able to adapt to the needs of students with different learning requirements. So for purposes of this particular presentation, I have conducted a small survey with regards to learners with Down syndrome from the Youth with Disabilities Empowerment Platform. And what I have found is that the big majority of learners with Down syndrome are currently enrolled in special education needs schools, be it NGO-run institution, SEN units, or integrated units. So only 10% of the learners were being enrolled in the mainstream system. And as far as the funding was concerned, most of them were being privately funded. And although many parents believed that the school was at a reasonable distance from their houses, the big majority, 70% of them, were not provided with transport facilities. As far as the quality of education itself is concerned, the majority of parents believe that the children were not being taught the basic language literacy and numeracy skills that they were supposed to be, and that there was no curriculum per se in the majority of cases. And if there was a curriculum, most of the parents believed that it was not adapted to the needs of the children. And as far as the individualized education plan is concerned, it is mostly inexistent in schools at this point for learners with Down syndrome. Most parents believed that there were no easy complaint and redress mechanism, and that no adjustments were being made as far as any additional difficulties that learners with Down syndrome may be experiencing, which includes, for example, visual and hearing impairments. But there was also, in the majority of cases, no speech and language therapies, no visual aids, and overall, most of the parents believed that their children were being discriminated against under the current regime. And as you will see, 45% were not overall satisfied of the current regime the child were currently under. And when asked about what improvements they would like to see, most of the parents mentioned the fact that they wanted to see more of an inclusive system, the need for teachers, to be adequately trained, the fact that there needed to be awareness programs, and more involvement, more of their involvement at school. So based on these numbers, I believe that the reservation in itself that has been placed on Article 24.2b prevents learners from accessing the type of education which will enable them to reach their full potential. Mostly because, like I've said, many of the learners with Down syndrome are not being included in the mainstream system, but the quality of education in itself does not meet the appropriate standard which was intended under the CRPD. but in the majority of cases, school was not free because most of the parents are having to pay to send their children to school. And finally, as far as the requirement of community they live in is concerned, I believe that although most of the parents mentioned that the school is at a reasonable distance from their houses, they're not provided with transport facilities, which may create a big inconvenience, especially for working parents. So it is my submission that because this reservation has been placed on the CRPD, it prevents learners with Down syndrome from having access to that type of education, which will enable them to reach their full potential, which is in conflict with the purpose of Article 1 of the CRPD. And it fails to provide suitable safeguards to their rights and inherent dignity. And for that reason, I believe that this reservation is highly discriminatory towards learners with Down syndrome. And it goes without saying that there are various advantages of inclusive education for learners with Down syndrome, be it academically, be it socially, or be it emotionally. But in any event, this reservation is preventing them from reaching out to their full potential. And I believe that ultimately it is up to the state body to take appropriate actions with regard to this particular issue. There needs to be changes in attitude, in practices, in laws. There need to be appropriate laws which specifically cater for the right of inclusive education, as opposed to laws which reinforce special education needs, which is currently in place now. So I believe that it is important for every leadership of every country to take strong and appropriate actions with regards to inclusive education. And in that regard, the Down Syndrome International has set out a list of guidelines, and I do not propose to go into details through all of them, but do read them in your own time, because it provides some interesting insight as to how to be able to implement inclusive education. And finally, as far as the way forward itself is concerned, I believe that the first step is to obviously remove the reservation and abolish old and outdated laws, as well as aligning existing laws with the CRPD, because it is my opinion that current laws are insufficient in themselves to protect and promote the rights of learners with Down syndrome in Mauritius. Just quickly then, the Youth with Disabilities Empowerment Platform is highly committed to an inclusive education system, and we have been advocating for the need to remove this reservation for many years now, and we have been supporting lifelong education by providing vocational trainings, by providing employment opportunities to persons with Down syndrome, and we organize many activities and awareness campaigns all year round to be able to better represent persons with Down syndrome in Mauritius. So to conclude, I would say that for all the reasons that I've mentioned today, but the reservation which has been placed on Article 24.2b is discriminatory for learners with Down syndrome, in as much as it prevents them from having access to education that will better protect and promote their rights under the CRPD overall. But there is a need for Mauritius to take initiatives to bind itself to take measures regarding inclusive education, and the first step would be to remove that reservation, because it only supplements to the current stigma which are faced by learners with Down syndrome. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me. I hope that this has been helpful, and thank you, World Down Syndrome Congress, for making me part of this whole journey. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.